Hey guys, what's up? This is False Bulls 123, and this is day 46 of our quarantine vlogs. So today I was planning on doing a just showing you one of my D&D mazes. Sorry, my bad. Showing you one of my Minecraft structures, which is a maze, much different. But since my yesterday's video ran so long, I thought it would be really smart to just split up into two parts. Because one thing I've been considering that while I am vlogging daily, that doesn't necessarily mean that I need to constrict myself to just having one vlog made each day. Rather, I think it would be more wise to actually think about ways that I can split up concepts and ideas like that. Just because I am I have to find a way to keep an equilibrium if I'm going to be vlogging daily. So yesterday I rapped for you a little bit, and I hope you enjoyed that. And so today I'm going to be showing you the rest of my footage for that day, where I actually had spent some time discussing the process, what all the lyrics meant, what my meaning behind them was. And it's not great, it never is, but it's something. And it's something I hope you enjoy. So please do enjoy the following, content. So that was me being very bad at remembering the lyrics to my own song, by which I mean rap, that I wrote myself. So, first of all, I would like to talk just about, I guess, some of the structure and some of the meaning behind the song, because that's always fun, and you can, definitely get sort of a process of that, which I enjoy listening from creators. One criticism I have mostly for after I wrote this song is that it doesn't have a very clear, I guess, concept. So I make a joke about so I mentioned the term spiritualism several times throughout the book, through the rap song, but then the rest of it is a bit more abstract of ideas. So, first of all, I mentioned you're a fox and so is your sister. This is clearly a reference to the Fox Sisters, which were a group of mediums that kind of were the beginning of the spiritualist movement in the 1940s. And so it's a little bit you a bad bitch, can I get up in your DMs and stuff like that. But then I also reference a lot of other, I guess, stories and folklore and other things that don't exactly tie in. And so I think that if I was to rewrite this, which I'm not sure if I ever will, just because I'm not, I don't focus on being a rapper. This was something I did for fun, a long time ago. But, yeah. I guess a lot of the stuff that I actually reference quite a few things throughout this entire, rap. It has a lot of allusions, a lot of references that I don't really know if it adds to it more than just flavor. So I'm just going to start at the beginning and kind of mention some of the references here, because it's probably the only time I'm ever going to mention this rap song. And yeah, and we can just have kind of fun with that. So, like I said, Fox Sister, the Fox Sisters, is a little bit of a pun. Then I say there's a witch in the cellar, she's ringing her bell. So I believe there was the Fox Sisters mentioned knowing a ghost names with the last surname of Bell. But I actually used this as a reference to the Bell Witch, which is it was this East Coast, folklore. It was this, witch that was supposedly, haunting the family. And interestingly enough, I believe they did use a spirit board to communicate with her at one point during, the events that happened. So there's a little bit of, reference there. Mine is in a well and throwing a mixer. That's really just another reference to sort of, I guess, ghosts, and it sort of sense that, these people in a well and they're throwing a party. I believe my inspiration for that line was, I don't remember what it's exactly called, but it was this episode of Lore by Aaron Mahnke where he was discussing these miners who, were in this cave and they drowned, and so you can, hear them, and so it's, this sort of, ghost tunnel. If I find the name of it, I'll, try to edit that in, but it was something like that. So, moving on, you're disappearing like Airside Tragedy, that's kind of vague, but and that's kind of, I just wanted to have, a more vague thing to have that sort of nautical theme for the rest of it. I'm moving to you like a corpse on a balcony. That's a reference to, I believe it was called the Leeds Lighthouse. Basically, there's these two lighthouse keepers, and one of them dies, and so and there's like no way to like get rid of the body, so he's in a coffin on the sort of balcony of the lighthouse. And so the storm happens, and so basically this guy's corpse gets tethered to the railing, and these ships come by, but like they keep getting waved off by the corpse, and it was like super creepy. So if I'm, so like on one hand, the person like the narrator, or like I guess the person in the story who's like trying to get up in this girl's yams is like waving to him, but it's this whole thing has a lot of really macabre imagery because it's utilizing all of these like weird stories and folklore as a sort of reference. Mary Celeste, I wish you'd go away with me. That's self-explanatory. From the heights of the cliff to the bottom of the troubled sea. I actually love that line just because it has a nice flow to it, has a nice rhythm, but it also has this sort of visual action where you're cliff diving, right? You're at the top of the cliffs and you're to the bottom of the troubled sea, and so that sort of like ties in the rest of the nautical references in that verse. Then we have like this sort of like a little bridge one where we're talking about a crown on the cliffside. It's a will-o'-wisp nightlight, and that's sort of like the idea of like a will-o'-wisp on a cliff. If you don't know what a will-o'-wisp is, it is essentially a mythical creature. They were believed to be, I believe they have like a bunch of different names, but pretty much they are these sort of like balls of light that people would see in like bogs or swamps, and they would like want you to follow them. But oftentimes they would like follow you like they would like get you trapped in the bog, or they're like have you fall off a cliff or something, and so they weren't always seen as good omens. And so it's kind of like the idea of the cliffs is that it was like this dangerous moment, and so we sort of move from the idea of like the oceans and the cliffside to a will-o'-wisp on the cliffside. So it's sort of a, I guess, thought association. Like I said, the story doesn't have the rap doesn't have the best consistency in concept, and I feel like that's definitely an issue. That when I wrote this, I didn't really have as strong an idea for what I wanted to rap about. And I don't think that rap music in general is always very, I guess, focused. Usually there'll be a general topic, but I mean, like, a lot of rap music that I really enjoy tends to have a lot of things thrown at the wall in the story, but it's the ability to keep on flow that I guess is important. I don't know, definitely debate me in the comments if you think, that's not true, that everything somebody mentions in a rap song is, super on point, or, the message. But I think, I've heard rap music that's, very, very specific, it's very narrative, it has, a very clear, consistent message. And then also, listen to rap songs that I really enjoy, but, there's a lot of stuff that, I'm not really sure why they're mentioning it, but I like how they're saying it. For instance, let's discuss the song Slim Shady. Why are there cannonballs and cantaloupes and cutting people and, humping dead mooses? There's a lot of stuff there that, does not fit with the same thing about people gossiping about him at, the Emmys. So it's like I said, people will mention things, but they won't always be as tied in. Now, I'm going to get off that, because if I won't shut up, this video is going to be 20 minutes long, and I actually do want to discuss a few more of the references I use, because I think it's really interesting if you can get the same amount of meaning of it as I try to put in. So then we have sort of the beginning. I make a lot, it doesn't sound like it probably because I'm a shit rapper and you probably could not hear the lyrics, but I actually make quite a few double entendres in the give me a second. A few entendres, how do you pronounce it, in the rap song? Because the song is literally supposed to be this sort of club beat where this guy's just hey little mama, let me whisper in your ear, and she's like, I got a man. So obviously. So I have an ember in my turnip, it's leading you astray. I feel like I should say it's leading me astray. I did not write that correctly. I can't find my head, but you're giving me some anyway. So, one of the early progenitors for Jack-o'-lanterns was this folklore idea that is actually, if I remember correctly, Jack-o'-lanterns have a similar history with will-o'-wisps. One of the stories of will-o'-wisp was that there was a spirit who had a turnip, and inside the turnip was like this sort of burning ember that lit the way for him in the swamps. And so when I say he has an ember in my turnip, it's once again a reference to the Will-O-Wisp mythology. But at the same time, it's a little bit of a, I have some heat in my root, and it's a dick joke. And so, like, it's leading me astray. Like, he's literally saying, like, yeah, I'm thinking with the other head right here. But it says, I can't find my head, which I feel like it have many, many different interpretations, but I also just kind of think, like, the Headless Horseman in that sense, like, he can't find his head, and there's, like, the whole turnip, jack-o'-lantern, pumpkin thing. So, like, there's a lot of different ways you can play it, but it's also, like, in that ballywick. But then I say, but you're giving me some anyway, which, hopefully you can get what I meant by that. Next verse, it becomes even more horribly explicit. And I'm thinking, wow, Ryan, you already made a blowjob joke. How explicit can it get? Well, I'm just going to read this to you, and then I'm going to explain why it's, like, yeah. You want to go wassailing, but I really want to see them tassels spin. I'll give you a gift because you're the boat owner. I'll make you sing to a cup runneth over. So wassailing, I'm not really sure how it's pronounced because I'm not British or medieval. But it was essentially a early form of trick-or-treating, which once again goes into like the whole jack-o'-lantern, with sort of like, that sort of symbolism. Similar sort of, I guess, iconography. But then I say I really want to see those tassels spin. For those that don't understand that reference, essentially, not really sure how to explain it. I guess like in sort of like with exotic dancers, there is some costuming where people essentially have tassels on like the nips and like they spin, and people are into that for some reason. But it's basically like, you want to go party, but like, I kind of just want to see your dress on the floor. It's basically what it means, but I wanted to be a little obscure with my meaning. And then he says, I'll give you a gift because you're the boat owner. So in wassailing, some of the people would have bowls where they would like collect like apples or soul cakes or something. But in this sense, I'm really using bowl as a euphemism for what it usually is a euphemism for. And I'll say I'll make you sing to your cup runneth over, and so also one of the things about wassailing is that it's sort of like this weird combination of trick-or-treating and caroling. And so, like, when somebody says I'll make you sing, that's a euphemism. And the idea of the cup runneth over is, I also feel, is a fairly explainable euphemism. That is literally referencing some biblical verse, which I can't recall off the top of my head, but if you ever read the Bible, you will probably understand which verse I'm talking about. Anyway, and so, like, at this point, he feels like, he offended, like, this chick. And so he doubles back and says, hey, I don't mean to be crass. I'm wording like iron, even though it's just brass. So he's being brass because, like, he's being forward and coof. Or uncouth? I can never remember which one is the mean one. And warding like iron, so basically fairy, like sprites, anything like that, they are usually warded with cold iron. And so it's like, hey, a little bit of a pun there, more references to like that sort of folklore. So look between my ears and soon you'll see that I'm something like a horse who's seen a ring in the grass. That's probably the most obscure of my references. In some folklore, it was believed that when horses stopped, it was because fairies were sort of like holding the horse's ears or something. I don't know, like, they referenced it in, like, a bunch of, like, fairy tales that I've read, and I'm thinking, that's so, like, weirdly specific. But so, I'm sort of, like, making the reference of look between my ears, but at the same time, it's like, I mean it as see my intentions, while also having that reference. And then the horse who's seen a ring in the grass, it's not like, a jewelry ring, but rather a fairy ring. So there's, like, there's sort of, like, a different take on what we're sort of, like, implying there. The next two verses, I'm really sort of referencing a German fairy tale called Allerleira, I believe it's called, or Many-Verse. And so I will discuss, I'm going to give you a short synopsis of that so I can, like, really explain, so I can just sort of, like, breeze past all this. Pretty much, there's this chick, her, like, dad is just like, hey, my wife's dead, can I be, like, a little bit of a pedo? And she's just like, no, papa, that's gross, I'm going to go run away now. And so she does that, and she gets, like, she wears this cloak that he made her, which is, like, covered in, like, every animal in the kingdom, so a taxidermist nightmare. It sounds hideous. And then she has like these three like really awesome looking dresses. Like one's like as golden as the sun, one's as silver as the moon, one is as bright as the stars. Like everyone like talks in similes in fairy tales because like everything's an allegory or something. And so pretty much like she has this like whole Cinderella thing. Not exactly Cinderella, but she has this like whole Cinderella thing where she's like dropping golden shit in this like guy's like soup dish, and then like wearing some hot ass like ball gowns and like hitting on the prince. And eventually they're just like, wait, that chick that wears that ugly ass coat who makes our food, what if she was secretly hot? And if that sounds familiar to you, is a lot of like stories like it, like I'm off the top of my head, Kappa Rushes. It's a similar structure to a lot of other fairy tales, just as similar as the Beast's husband sort of fairy tale, which I actually mentioned later in this rap. So One Night in a House Shell with Bread Baking, that actually does not have to do with Alara. It's actually a reference to changelings, who it was believed that one of the ways to see if your child was a changeling was to bake a loaf of bread in a walnut shell, and if the child laughed at that, they were a changeling, because only changelings thought that baking bread in tiny shells was funny. Or it was a way of getting the changeling out of the kid. I don't even remember. Changeling stories are super complicated, and it's sad. And that's just how it works. Sea silk in the dress hall, now that's risk-taking. Sea silk is a type of very sheer fabric that was actually used in medieval times. And the reason why I mention it is that in the story, she keeps all three of these like ball gowns in this walnut shell, which sounds impossible. But interestingly enough, sea silk was so fine that you would actually keep a pair of like opera gloves folded up in a walnut shell. Which, if you don't know what a walnut shell is, it's about the size of like a good eraser. It's small. It's like yay big. It's like a bouncy ball size. So the fact that she could keep 3 dresses in there was like unrealistic. But so I used the idea of sea silk because I read that. I'm thinking like, okay, walnut shell, like there was a sort of like comparison there. Then gold bling in the soup well, there's hint making, so that one's pretty explanatory. And then Peter wanted to prove that dress that you're wearing because she's literally wearing furs of thousands of animals and birds and presumably leather. Like, I don't know if it specifically mentions that like lizard skin was like part of it, but I believe they said like every beast and bird in the kingdom in the story. So presumably like one side she had like 50,000 like bird plumes and then just like alligator skin like somewhere like for the trimming. Who knows? Like, I would love to see some sort of like high fashion interpretation of German fairy tale clothing description, and I would love for that. So the next one becomes a little bit more, I guess, sort of tangential, but I also just love how it just like rolled off the tongue. The sun, the moon, and the stars, you're spangled. So spangled means to be covered in stars, so she's literally spangled and she's wearing a dress that's star-like. I want to hold on to your arm like I'm a wrist spangle. That's self-explanatory. It's just a simile. And then I make a pun. Bangle like a tiger in the jungle when the vines grow tangled. So, obviously, 2 different forms of the word bangle. But then that's the idea of a tiger who is essentially ensnared in vines. And then I switch, once again, the imagery again by making a comparison. Like your hair in the morning because of the sprite that you've angered. So, basically, like, the character wants to hold on to them tightly because, like, they're into them. But then they also compare it to this idea of being trapped and then to a sprite. So, some of the beliefs is that if you angered a, like, brownie or kobold or something like that, they will become a Bogart, which is essentially, like, this really mean imp that will, like, do, like, nasty shit to you, like, pinch you and, like, tear your hair to a bed frame. Like, weirdly specific, like, just read this first Spiderwick Chronicles book and it will make perfect sense where I got that imagery from. And so then we sort of move into one of the first character voices in the last part of the rap, which I think I should really condense it just because this is where it really goes off end. So I basically have like 2 different characters that I have speaking besides the narrator, or as a different aspect of the narrator because I am not good at writing consistent rap lyrics apparently. Sorry about that. So, but he called me a beast husband because when we read I'm going to rip that garter. Basically, this is the introduction of the character idea of Renard, who in German fairy tales is a fox spirit. And that's what many of the lyrics to this are referencing. A beast husband refers to the folklore trope of essentially somebody getting married off to an animal. It's Beauty and the Beast, essentially. Pretty much, somebody gets, married off to, this animal, and the chick's like, wow, this, wolf or something is going to eat me. But then it, turns out that he's secretly a super buff hot dude underneath, and she's like, gotta get that dick. And that's how all folklore stories happen. Folklorists actually believe that many of the reasons why these fairy tales came up, and why it was such a common trope, was that it was actually an allegory for essentially the idea of marriage. That at first, somebody being marriage, a lot more scary of a concept if it was an arranged thing. And so it was originally perceived that, her husband might be violent or vicious or cruel, but after she got to know them, they were much more not a giant asshole who just wanted to breed her for heirs. And so that's kind of a big idea of how those stories came about. That it was it was an allegory for that type of thing. There actually are quite a few fairy tales that utilize the concept, and I would like to talk about that at a later point, but not today because this is already 20 minutes long, and the rap was only 2 fucking minutes. So I'm sorry that I can't shut up. But this I really like to explain why I got into all of this information. So hopefully you're enjoying the conversation. And so, anyway, break into your larder and feast on filter a fox to the slaughter. This is actually a reference to an Aesop's fable, where basically I think it was a wolf and a fox, and this fox was just let me just shove some chickens down my gullet, but then it gets too fat to leave the coop and it's murdered. And basically, the moral of the story is don't be a fucking glutton. And then I believe I don't have it written down, but I do have a second verse where it's call me Reynard, I've got that clever little tongue. Yes. So Reynard has a clever little tongue because he's sort of this trickster spirit. Brun is essentially a brown bear, and that's actually why I named Mama Brun after her, even though she is quite clearly a black bear. But don't hate me for not having consistent naming conventions for a language I don't speak. Anyway. But pretty much, there's a lot of stories where Reynard essentially pulls a fast one on Brun, who is this, down-to-earth fella. Or chick. I don't really know if Brun is supposed to be, a guy in those stories. And then the final verse, whether the bottom's plump or the top's green or what's in between, I know that you know what I mean. So pretty much that's another reference to another German fairy tale where basically Reynard was just like, hey, let's go have a garden plot together and we'll split it, and they're like, okay. And so I believe they did carrots and turnips or something like that. Or something similar, and it's basically each time they agreed to take different parts of the plant. But if it was carrots, Reynard was just yeah, I'll take the bottom, I'll take the bottoms of them, and Brun would always get the losing hand where they would eat something that wasn't that great for them. That wasn't the food part of the plant. And so, there's that. But there's also, the reference of plump bottoms, which is a bit obvious. Or what's in between, which is another sex joke. Because apparently, I am a whore who likes to make whore music. I know. My legs and the headboard breaks. What? Anyway. So pretty much there's just a little bit of silly sex jokes. And then we move on to the second character voice, which it's just, I like the character. I actually think that I might move the whole Renard thing to a different rap song if I ever actually flesh out these rap lyrics. But we move on to Mr. Splitfoot, who's the only actual reference to spiritualism or the Fox sisters in this entire fucking rap. And I'm just Ryan, what the fuck are you doing with your life? Can you write a rap song that actually has consistent motif? No, you cannot, bitch. No, you cannot. But let's discuss what I said about Mr. Splitfoot. Basically, Mr. Splitfoot was this sort of spirit of the Fox sisters, so they believed in. And it was also an old-timey euphemism for, the devil, because he had cloven feet, was the belief. And so, I basically, along with, making with that reference, many other references here are again sort of the folklore that rose around sort of like, American folklore involving the devil. Which sounds super, super goth and creepy, but we'll roll with it because apparently I like folklore and I forgot to mention that. So I'm wrapping up the tables and I'm creaking up the stairs. So creaking up the stairs is sort of like, just a bit of a filler. But wrapping up the table specifically was sort of a reference to the seance. Then I say, I rise, you fall like the morning star. This is a reference to, of course, Lucifer, who is translated as the morning star. And there's all this symbolism there. The idea of it rising and falling is a reference to the star itself. And then I do yet another reference to this. Call me King of Tyre, because I supply that timber. So, supplying some wood, and I do apologize about background noise. My little cousin's home, and he seems a bit cranky. So, supplying the timber, we all know what that means. But what does it mean in illusionary senses? So, if I remember correctly, King of Tyre had two references. The phrase King of Tyre has two separate references in the Bible as far as I can understand. It's used, one, as a reference, once again, to the devil. And two, there was actually a friend of Solomon's who supplied wood for the building of the tabernacle in the Bible. So there's actually, a little bit of some biblical references in well, because I got some roots to reference, apparently. Let's see. So then we move on to, the second verse, which is not as good as the first in my opinion, mostly just because I had a really hard time with the references I wanted to go for. So he says, call me a spiritualist because you know I supply that liquor. I believe that I've also done this line before. I've changed it several times. The original version of it was pour these libations, which I feel works a little better narrative-wise, but doesn't work with the rhyme scheme. And then I say, I spit it sick, tongue so sharp, I'm dripping ichor. So in this one, it's implying that, split foot does not have regular blood, but ichor, or ichor, I believe. I know I'm pronouncing it, wrong, but, artistic license. Ichor, or however you pronounce it, is essentially the lifeblood of the gods in, Greek mythology, so there's a little bit of this reference that he's a bit more supernatural. And when we swing in the dance hall, you can't help but to scream to the spies, oh. Don't love that, but essentially there is a very common folklore in the United States across multiple, geographical areas. I've found, references to it in, Canadian folklore. I've also seen it, in Hispanic folklore as well. And that's essentially the devil and the dance hall tale. Essentially, there's this woman who's, goes out dancing in, a dance hall, and she meets this, really nice guy. Until she, and they're, dancing along until she looks at her feet, and she sees that he has cloven feet. And so she's like, oh, wait a second, you Satan, I don't want to dance with you anymore. My dance card is full, honey. And he's like, fine, bitch, be that way. And they, walked up or something. I don't remember how the story ends. So, because I've originally seen it as being around, the southern United States, being more of a, being found more Mexico and places like that. He said, you scream two spies, which is literally your feet in Spanish, but it doesn't work that well. And it's why do you look at me so innocently? Can't you see I've lost my halo? And then he's just hey, I'm literally the devil in this scene. Why are you being so nice to me, bitch? Then I have this sort of bridge part, which is near the end where the whole thing just goes off the fucking rails. And I basically say, it's between the devil and the deep blue sea. That is an American idiom, which basically translates to being in a difficult situation between two not good alternatives. And then I make, once again, another section. Honestly, why is this such a filthy song? It's literally a song about a guy trying to pick up a chick at a club, but why you gotta be so filthy? If my mother listened to me sing this song, she would blush. I'm not Lee's child, but I'll suck at that teat, which I don't even have to explain the reference to explain why that's dirty, but I will explain what Lee's child is. So this is once again yet another reference to American folklore, and not German folklore for a change, yay! Lee's child is a epigram, I don't remember what it's called. It's essentially a epithet, I think that's the name of it, yes, of the Jersey Devil. The belief was that the Jersey Devil was essentially the 13th child of a woman named Leeds, who was wow, I've been popping out so many babies, this next one's gonna be a devil child, because fuck your standards. And so she pops out a baby, and it looks fine. And then it turns into a monstrous horse-looking, like half horse, half goat, half dog thing with like a snake for a tail and giant wings and all of this shit. And like it just flies up like, the chimney and starts destroying shit or something. I don't exactly remember. Pretty much the one way you placate the Jersey Devil is by giving it an offering of milk. Which, sort of like, I'm thinking like milk, you mean bit of that titty. So like, not probably the most clearest connection, but I'm just like, titty. Yeah. Anyway. So that was me terribly, horribly, and just exasperatingly discussing my rap song that was 2 minutes long and super shitty, but all of the fun references that I put into it. And I hope that, gives you a better insight on my interests and stuff like that. And I'm not going to shame you at all if, you do not watch this entire video, because it was a lot longer than I wanted to be, but we had a lot to unpack here. So, you can see that I am a fucking weirdo who talks too much about things. But I had a lot of fun originally writing that song, and so it was fun to share a little piece of my life with you, even if I felt that I went on for way too long. Anyway, guys, just remember, you can like, comment, subscribe. I will let you do that, no worries. And this is going to be False Bulls for free, and I'm signing off.